Hello everyone. We'll be looking at the 2016 ZAT paper today, the verbal section. This paper was a mixture. Let's start with this one. Which of the following options best captures the relationship similar to? Okay, so what are the words we have? Inspect and vivisect. Yes. Now, inspect is to look carefully at something. Vivisect is a detailed observation and analysis, right? So to look very deeply, to look very closely, to examine something very closely is to vivisect. Okay. So you could say a higher degree of inspect. All right. So that's the relationship we're looking for. Now, inquire and observe. To inquire is to ask about something, right? So you ask questions, you try to find out details. Observe is when you don't really ask, but you look at something, right? You watch something. Yes. So they're not the same, and they're definitely one is not the of a higher degree than the other. Yeah? So it is not option one. Okay, then we have option 2, which says inquire and explore. Inquire are interchangeable, right? The meaning is definitely interchangeable. So it is to ask. Yes, you could say explore if anything is a greater degree of observation, right? It's not to a greater degree of inquiring. Yeah, so option 2 also can be eliminated. Then we have option 3, which says investigate and interrogate. Okay, now investigate is to find out details, to ask questions. Yes, so all of that, right? And to interrogate is a higher degree of that. Yes, so this is the answer. Query and survey. Query is a question, survey is to look around, right? So that again doesn't work. And question and respond has nothing to do with this particular relationship again. Yes, so we eliminate all the other options. The best choice we get is option 3. This is the poem, a short one. With poetry, you always take a call. Take a look at the question and see whether you're then able to solve it on the basis of keywords at least, right? So the question here is, which of the following would best capture the essence of the poem above? Okay, so what does it say? Let's take a look at the poem quickly since it's a short one. I sought a soul in the sea. Okay, sought is the past tense of seek, right? So I searched for, okay, a soul in the sea and found a coral there. Beneath the foam for me, an ocean was all laid bare. Laid bare means it was completely open to my sight, right? I could see all there was to see. Into my heart's night, along a narrow way I groped. Okay, so take a look at this. Into my heart's night. Okay, night here could signify darkness, right? Could signify something that we don't know about, right? Along a narrow way, I groped. Groped is I found, I tried to feel my way as I went through because it was dark, right? And lo, the light, an infinite land of day. Okay, so as I groped my way along, somewhere I came to the light and an infinite, unending land of day. Okay, so what would capture the essence of this poem? Right now, it says the first one says, what lies outside is always deceptive. Okay, now there is nothing here that says deceptive, that it is, it tends to cheat or mislead you, right? So there is nothing in this particular poem that talks about cheating or misleading. All right, so option 1 can be eliminated. Pursue the narrow path and avoid the broad ways. Okay, so this is a little too literal, right? Yes, the narrow way is mentioned, but it doesn't say anything about pursuing one and leaving out the other. Okay, external search is futile. Explore the inner space for answers. Okay, so this is our answer, right? We'll connect it back to the poem. We'll just take a quick look at options 4 and 5. Heart's pathways are broad and clear to find the destination. Okay, so the heart's pathways, while that might still be inferred, right? It doesn't say broad and clear. Yes, and again, it talks about destination, right? So for those reasons, we can eliminate that because it does talk about a narrow way, right? It does talk about the darkness. And light offers sight and insight, maybe, right? But what about the rest of the poem? We don't know, right? So this is definitely not the essence of this poem, right? Now, external search is futile, right? So what does it say? I sought a soul in the sea and found a coral there. Okay, but beneath. Yes, so that indicates, yes, so when I looked at the sea, I found a coral, all right, but as I looked deeper, Okay, that's when I found lo the light. Lo and behold, right, is an exclamation that indicates surprise and awe, wonder. Yes, so that's what it says. So that's why external search is futile. Futile is pointless. Explore the inner space for answers, right? So this is a logic based question. All right, it's called parallel reasoning. Assumptions are analogous. Analogous is comparable to the basic ingredients in a gourmet recipe. Okay, so assumptions are analogous to they're comparable to the basic ingredients in a gourmet recipe. What does a gourmet recipe indicate or imply? Right, something that is very fancy, something that is made by an expert, right? Something that requires maybe some skills to make and things like that, right? Now, assumptions, the author says, are comparable to the basic ingredients, right? The final product is something else, but this is comparable to the basic ingredients. Only the final product of the recipe dictates whether the ingredients suffice, right? So what is an assumption? An assumption is an unstated premise, right? It is the basis of the argument. Okay, so you have the evidence that the author provides, clearly states, and then there is something that is taken for granted but not stated. Yes, so that then becomes the assumption, right? Now, it is only when the final product is produced, right? When the final product is ready, only then can we tell whether the ingredients, whether the basic ingredients are enough to get us to that fantastic dish, right? So in the same way, for the conclusion, right, only once the conclusion has been given do we know whether the assumptions are enough. Yes, so which one is analogous, comparable to the statement above? Yes, so we need a similar argument, right? That is the idea. So good wine needs no advertisement. There's nothing about advertising here, right? So it's not about publicizing something. The apple never falls far from the tree. The apple never falls far from the tree is a saying, right? An adage which basically means that, especially in the case of children, right? They say, when they say the apple never falls from the tree, it means that the children are very very similar to the parents. Yes. So that doesn't fit here. All is well that ends well. Okay. Well, this might seem like a possibility, but they are saying that, it is only once the final product is ready that we'll know whether the basics were enough, right? So there's nothing about all is well that ends well. Yes. So all is well, we don't know. As you sow, so shall you reap. No, right? It is only once the product comes that we know. So we have 5, which says the proof of the pudding is in the eating. This is another proverb or adage, which means that it is only when the final product is ready that we'll know whether all the effort that has been put into it is worth it or not, right? If the people are, happy to eat it, then you know that the basics are enough. Okay, so this is the one that is most similar to the given argument, right? We have here a parajumble ordering of sentences type of question. This one especially is very simple, very straightforward, definitely something you should attempt. Okay, something like this. Now, the first and the last sentences of the paragraph are numbered 1 and 6. Here, you have a 6-sentence parajumble. Now, generally with the 6-sentence parajumbles, the first and the last sentences are fixed, which will be numbers 1 and 6. The 4 sentences in between are jumbled up and we have to put them in order. Okay, so the introductory sentence is already there. We're looking for something that we can connect to that introductory sentence. All right. So let's see. The introductory sentence here is, suppose I know someone, Smith. Okay, so who's that someone? Smith. All right. Now, what would follow this? What do we have? One day you come to me and say, Smith is in Cambridge. Okay, so suppose I know someone, Smith. Yes, sentence P mentions Smith, right? But it says Smith is in Cambridge. It has already gone one step ahead, I would say. Okay. Q says, I inquire and find you stood at Guildhall. No, this doesn't have any direct connection to suppose I know someone. Then you have R, which says, I'd say, listen, this is insufficient evidence. Okay, what is this? We don't have a reference to that. So S is the one that follows sentence 1. I'd heard that he has been killed in a battle in this war. Okay, so the he will be a reference to Smith and it carries the idea further. Suppose I know someone, what did I hear? I've heard that he has been killed in a battle in this war. Okay, so S is the one that makes the most sense after 1. Okay, so in this case, we are lucky, right? If we are able to make this connection, then we get the answer also, which is option 1, right? So what do we have? We have SPQR. Okay, so what follows S? I have heard that he has been killed in a battle in this war. One day you come to me and say Smith is in Cambridge. Okay, followed by Q, which says I inquire, right? Why do I inquire? Because you've told me that Smith is in Cambridge. Yes, and find you stood at Guildhall and saw at the other end a man and said that was Smith. Okay, so once I inquire further, what do I find? That this person who came and told him that Smith is in Cambridge stood at Guildhall and saw at the other end a man. Okay, so what would the response to that be? This isn't sufficient evidence. Just because you saw a man at the other end and said, okay, that's Smith, right? That isn't enough evidence, especially because I'd heard that Smith had been killed in a war. Okay, and this will be followed by R, which would say, listen, this is insufficient evidence. Okay, if we had a fair amount of evidence. So this is another way of forming a connection. R and 6, right, isn't sufficient evidence. If we had a fair amount of evidence, R and 6 are also connected. So if you're able to establish either the connection between 1 and S or 6 and R, you'll get this answer very easily. This one is a little more difficult, right? So let's take a look at it. What do we have? Again, same type of question. The first and the last sentences are fixed. Okay, we have to set in order P, Q, R, and S. Yes, so the first sentence says the word symmetry is used here with a special meaning and therefore needs to be defined. So we get the word symmetry, that's the subject, and then it says it therefore needs to be defined. So what do we get? For instance. For instance is a phrase that conveys an example, right? So we definitely do not put this immediately after sentence 1. Q says when we have a picture symmetrical, right? So this also seems to be an idea, an example that is being explained. When a thing is symmetrical, how can we define it? Now, R does have the word define in it, right? It says it needs to be defined, so R does have that word. Professor Herman Weil has given this definition of symmetry. Okay, so this also has the word defined, but it's better to say, so since it says it needs to be defined, follow it up with R, which says how can we define it? Okay, so you follow it with R. That leaves us with two options. Okay, both of them say RQ. Okay, when a thing is symmetrical, how can we define it? When we have a picture symmetrical, one side is somehow the same as the other side. Okay, this will be followed by S, right, because it talks about this definition. Yes, and P gives an example of what is mentioned in S. Yes, therefore option 4 is the best choice. All right, let's take a look at this question. Yes, it says from the passage above, choose the correct option. Okay, so in the recent past, the Indian football team has lost most of the matches in international football tournaments. The most successful coaches in Indian club football tournaments are from Latin American countries. In most of the Latin American countries, football is a more popular sport than cricket. All right, this is the information that we have. Okay, what can we conclude from this passage? Yes, the first one says it can be definitely concluded that in India, cricket is more popular than football. Okay, can we definitely conclude this? No, we cannot, right? There's no way of definitely concluding that in India, cricket is more popular than football, because popularity wise, the only information we have been given is that in the Latin American countries, that too most of the Latin American countries, football is a more popular sport than cricket. Okay, does it say anything about which sport is popular in India? No, right? There's no information. So we cannot definitely conclude this particular statement. Yes, it can be definitely concluded that most Latin American countries are successful at football. Again, same thing. It does mention Latin American. It says that the most successful coaches are from Latin American countries. It also tells us that in most of the Latin American countries, football is a more popular sport than cricket. But is that enough for us to definitely conclude that most Latin American countries are successful at football? No. Right? So that also cannot be definitely concluded. It can be definitely concluded that in the recent past, coaches of Indian football teams are not from Latin America. Right now, we know that the most successful coaches are from Latin American countries. Right. To say that it can be definitely concluded, yes. The problem with all of these statements is that it says it can be definitely concluded. We cannot definitely conclude. There isn't enough information to connect the two. Right. We know that the Indian football team has lost most of the matches. We know that the most successful coaches are from Latin American countries, but that doesn't rule out the possibility that in the recent past, we had Latin American coaches, but the football teams didn't really win the matches. Yes. So we don't know. We don't have enough information. 4 says it can be definitely concluded that European football coaches are less successful than their Latin American counterparts for the Indian football team. Where did European football coaches come from? Right? Again, it is a definite conclusion. Yes. So we cannot get this. Now, 5 is different because for 1, it says it cannot be definitely concluded. So that is a definite difference from the other 4 options. It says it cannot be definitely concluded that the more popular a sport, the better the chance of producing a successful coach in that sport. Yes, because we know that the Indian football team has lost most of the matches. We also know that the most successful coaches are from Latin American countries. We know that in most of the Latin American countries, football is a more popular sport, right? But can we, from any of this, can we conclude definitely that the more popular a sport, the better the chance of producing a successful coach? No. We know that football is more popular than cricket in most of the Latin American countries. That's the only information we have about the popularity. Right? So this is not something that we can definitely conclude. So option 5 is the best because it mentions for sure that we cannot definitely conclude something. Right? None of these statements are things that we can conclude definitely from this particular passage. Yes, so here again we have a different kind of question. It asks you to identify the best pronunciation of the word, of this particular word. Yes, so a sobriquet, yes, that's how it is pronounced. So a sobriquet is a word, a name that is given, yes, to someone, maybe fondly, maybe to give that person some importance, maybe to highlight a particular characteristic of that person. All right, so the correct pronunciation, the appropriate pronunciation of this word is sobriquet. Okay, we do not pronounce the T. We have here another logic-based question. So there are 2 statements, yes, and 5 options that in some way or the other talk about each of the statements. Yes, so what does statement 1 say? Offices and positions for the marginalized sections should be open. So there's a recommendation that is being made, should be open to those, okay, with greater savings among them. All right, that's what statement 1 says. Statement 2 says offices and positions must be open to everyone based on the principle of fair opportunity. Okay, the question is which of the following is true? That is, which of these statements is true? Yes, so statement 1 assumes that the marginalized sections are incapable of saving. Yes, this is too strong a statement for these particular statements. Yes, so you could say this, it's too strong a word based on these 2 statements, especially statement 1. It says it should be open to those with greater savings among them. It doesn't say anywhere that they are incapable of saving. Right? There's just not enough information. Then statement 2 assumes that all citizens are equally exposed to all opportunities. Okay. Now statement 2 doesn't assume that they are equally exposed to all opportunities. Rather, it says, it recommends that opportunity should be open to everyone on the basis of, or on the principle of, fair opportunity. Okay, so this is out. Statement 2 contradicts meritocracy. Meritocracy is, when merit is supreme, right? When merit is the one that is given the most importance. Yes. So if statement 2 contradicts meritocracy, right? I wouldn't say it contradicts meritocracy. It says it should be open to everyone based on the principle of fair opportunity. Now, fair opportunity could very well include merit. We don't know. We don't have enough information. So we can't say that it contradicts meritocracy. Yes. Then we have statement 4, which says, option 4, which says statement 2 assumes that all citizens are equally intelligent. Okay. So this is the answer. We'll quickly eliminate 5. Statement 1 assumes that the marginalized sections always depend on subsidies. Where did subsidies come from? We don't know, right? And again, there's the red flag always, yes, which is not mentioned. Okay, so statement 4 is the one that is the most appropriate. Well, it talks about statement 2. So what does statement 2 say? It must be open to everyone based on the principle of fair opportunity, right? So if it is fair opportunity, one assumption that is made by statement 2 is that all citizens are equal in some way or the other, which in this case could very well be intelligence. Yes, therefore statement 4 is the best choice. Right, we have here another logic based question, a short passage. Which of the following, if true, will best reinforce? We're looking at a strengthen the argument kind of question. It says which of the following will best reinforce the author's view. Okay, now the passage tells us this season will pass. Okay, please note the word will pass. Yes, that means it will, this time will be over. Okay, the prime minister may not win. Okay, it's a possibility. This is a certainty that it will definitely pass. Yes, the prime minister may not win Lok Sabha elections, or she may not win, or she may not continue as prime minister, or she may. Okay, the country will survive whatever the texture of politics in this decade or the next. Okay, so we have two definite statements. One, the season will pass, meaning this time will be over. The prime minister may or may not win the election, may or may not continue as prime minister, but the country will survive whatever the texture of politics in this decade or the next. Okay, so how do we strengthen the idea that the country will survive? Okay, so the first option says the survival of any prime minister is dependent on the country's economic growth. Okay, now where did economic growth come from? There's no mention of or reference or indication of it in the passage, even if we are looking for a statement that reinforces the author's view. Okay, it has to be something that is directly related to the information provided in the passage. Yes, so suddenly to bring in economic growth and then to also say the survival of any prime minister is dependent on the economic growth, this is a connection that is again not established in the passage. Okay, the country has a vibrant young working population. Okay, young working population again, right? That might be providing a reason for the country to survive. Okay, but where is the mention or indication of it in the passage? There's no such thing. Okay, the survival of the country depends on a dynamic, growth-oriented prime minister, not on the texture of politics. Okay, now if this is true, then if anything, this might be a bit of a contradiction that the country may not survive, right? Because if the fact that the prime minister is going to continue or not continue is in question, right, then in that case, and if the country depends upon a dynamic, growth-oriented prime minister, then the country may not survive. Right, so it actually contradicts the passage. Therefore, 3 is out. The survival of the prime minister is dependent on the political texture of the country. This is actually reversing the argument in a way, right? So this doesn't reinforce the author's view that the country will survive. Yes, because we're not, this is talking about the survival of the prime minister. It's not talking about the survival of the country. Okay, so option 4 is the best choice. What does it say? The previous season. Okay, they're talking about this season. That's one of the direct connections that I was talking about, right? So information that is extra but is directly connected to whatever is mentioned in the passage. So the previous season had also witnessed similar political uncertainty. Where do we get political uncertainty from? The word uncertainty is not mentioned, but the sentence in the middle where it says the prime minister may not win or she may continue as prime minister or may not, right, talks about political uncertainty. Yes, so option 4 is the one that best strengthens the author's view. Okay, which of the following options best captures all the italicized words above, right? So if you are a person who enjoys playing around with vocabulary, enjoys looking at words, then this is a question that you should definitely do. The subject of this book is knavery, skullduggery, cheating, betrayal, unfairness, crime, sneakiness, malingering, cutting corners, immorality, dishonesty, betrayal, graft, wickedness, and sin. Okay. Now, if you look at this list of words, now, even if you don't know every single word in this, right, you may not know the exact meaning of every single word, but you know unfairness, you know crime, you know cheating, you most probably know betrayal also. It's a fairly common word, right? You know immorality, dishonesty, right? And sin, wickedness, right? You know enough words in this list that this is definitely something that you should attempt. All right. So what does this refer to? This refers to underhanded, devious kind of behavior. Okay, something going behind a person's back, trying to cheat a person, so on and so forth. Yes, so they are not merely aggressive. In fact, not all of these are aggressive, right? Knavery is not aggressive. Betrayal need not be aggressive. Immorality need not be aggressive. Dishonesty need not be aggressive. So it's not option one. Illegal behavior, right? Not all of these are illegal either, unfortunately. Yes, so there are some of them. Malingering, for example, is not really illegal. Malingering is, when you find excuses not to do work, finding a way to get out of doing work is malingering. Yes, now that's not illegal. Yes, deviant is right, because there are certain rules. It may be stated, it may be unstated, spoken, unspoken, written, unwritten, right? But there are certain rules. And when the behavior doesn't conform to those rules, then we call them deviant behavior. Okay, banned behavior. So again, banned is too strong a word. Vetoed is when two people have a discussion, right? And one person proposes something, the other person rejects it. That's known as vetoing. Right? So this doesn't make any sense. We have here again two arguments made by two people, Oinos and Agathos. The question says, which of the following options cannot be definitely inferred based on the above conversation? I'm going to work backwards here. The answer to this question is option 4. It says natural laws are creations of philosophers. Okay, natural laws are creations of philosophers. This is something that cannot be inferred from anywhere in the two arguments. Okay, but let's look at the others and see where we can get them from. Agathos was explaining something related to creation to Oinos. All right, this you get from now Agathos, right? So this is obviously from the second argument. It mentions creation here. Look at what he says. The cases of which you speak were, in fact, instances. Instances are examples of the secondary creation and of the only species of creation which has ever been since the first word spoke into existence, the first law, right? So it is something related to creation that Agathos was explaining to Oinos. Yes, so this can definitely be inferred from the passage. At the time of conversation, there was nothing called earth. This you get from the first paragraph, right? So it says, shortly before the final overthrow of the earth. Okay, overthrow in this case is more in the sense of creation, right? So shortly before the final overthrow of the earth, there were, I well remember, many successful experiments in what some philosophers were weak enough to denominate as name, right? The creation of animalculae. Okay, so we can get statement 2 also. The creation of animalculae is a natural law. So that's what it is, right? Shortly before the final overthrow of earth, very successful experiments and what they were weak enough to denominate the creation, right? It is not that they actually created it. Yes, it was created naturally, right? So it is a natural law. Okay, and law is a spoken word you get from the last part of the passage. Since the first word spoke into existence, the first law. So law is a spoken word. So options 1, 2, 3, and 5 can be inferred. Statement 4 cannot be inferred. We have again a short passage. Now we have to find an option that best completes the passage above. Dash, there is a degree of convergence. Okay, so it says there is a degree of convergence, but we have to look for something that completes the passage. Yes, so there is a degree of convergence. Convergence is coming together in the definition of trust, which can be summarized as follows. Trust is a particular level of the subjective probability with which an agent here just refers to a person, an actor. An actor, again, not not acting as we know it, but a person who does something, who takes some action. Okay, so in which an agent assesses that another agent or a group of agents will perform a particular action. Okay, so what is trust? It is the level of probability. That means each person judges for himself, right? So an agent assesses is judges or guesses, yes, that another person will perform a particular action. When we say we trust someone or that someone is trustworthy, we implicitly mean that the probability that he will perform an action that is beneficial to us. Okay, mind you, it is trust, right? So when we say that we trust someone, what does it mean? We mean that the probability that that person will perform an action that is beneficial to us, right? So since it is trust and since it says that we trust that person, that means the probability is high enough for us to find out if he will cheat us. Goes on a negative tangent, right? Because we're talking about trust. Is high enough for us to consider engaging in some form of cooperation with him, right? So if we trust someone, it means that the probability that the person will perform an action that is beneficial to us, we think that it is going to be beneficial to us, the action, right? So that probability is high enough that we would consider taking an action or engaging in some sort of cooperation. We would go along with what that person is doing. Okay, is low enough. It can't be. If the probability is low, right, low enough for him not to engage in negative behavior, yes, there's an attempt to make this into a positive statement, but we are looking for something that has a high probability of a positive behavior, right? So that's why option 3 doesn't work. Is high enough for us not to build defenses, yes, against his possible aggression. Again, it goes on a negative tangent. Yes, is low enough for us to attack him is definitely negative. So option 2 is the best choice. We have here the first reading comprehension passage, a fairly long passage, but I think most of you would find this interesting. It is a fairly interesting passage because, for one, it draws a comparison between interpersonal communication and a sport. Right, so it talks about bowling, it talks about ping pong, it talks about, let's say sports and games, right? It also talks about dumb charades. Okay, so it compares communication to these games and talks about how they are comparable. All right, so that's what the 3 paragraphs are talking about. So the analogy or the comparison is quite interesting. Okay, it makes for interesting reading. Let's start with the first question. The meaning closest to interchangeable, okay, in communication as bowling, in the paragraph that mentions communication as bowling, is, so what is the word that is most close to the meaning of the word interchangeable in this paragraph? Okay, this is where you find it. Let's read that sentence. Yes, maybe a sentence before it to get the context. Yet, if it is aimed well, the ball strikes the passive pins. The passive pins are the target audience with a predictable effect. In this one-way model of communication, okay, so bowling, communication as bowling is a one-way model of communication. The speaker, that is the bowler, must take care to select a precisely crafted message, which is the ball, and practice diligently to deliver it the same way every time. Okay, so we know what bowling is, right? We know how it works. It's a one-person game, so it is one way, right? There is no exchange from there. So the ball is sent from here, it knocks down the pins. Yes, so the author says, how can it be compared to communication? The speaker must take care to select a precisely crafted message and practice diligently to deliver it the same way every time. Okay, of course, that makes sense only if the target listeners are interchangeable, static pins waiting to be bowled over by our words, which they aren't. Okay, so he says this one-way thing will work only if the listeners are interchangeable, meaning it doesn't matter who the listener is, right? They're all similar. Okay, so the meaning we are looking for, the meaning of interchangeable as used in this particular paragraph is something that is similar. Okay, so the best choice for that will obviously be option 5, which is comparable. Complementary is something that goes along with something. So here it doesn't say that they suit. right? Because he says at the end of the sentence, he very definitely says which they aren't, right? So it is not complementary. Contiguous is adjoining. Okay, so one touching the other. Yes, so that doesn't work here. Conforming is again going along with something. Okay, compatible is suitable again. So conforming and compatible again are a little too close to each other also. So here, since we're looking for the meaning comparable, or since we're looking for the meaning similar, right, that's the best choice. Okay. Which of the following options is closest to the necessary condition of communication? What is absolutely necessary for communication? Okay, so the answer to this is option 1, all right, which we find in the last paragraph, which says, like charades, interpersonal communication is a mutual, ongoing process of sending, receiving, and adapting verbal and non-verbal messages with another person to create and alter images in both our minds. Communication between us begins where there is some overlap between two images and is effective to the extent that overlap increases. Okay, so this, it tells us threshold is like a limit or a boundary. Okay, overlap of shared images, right? So he says it becomes successful is effective to the extent that the overlap increases, that each person begins to understand the other person better and better. Okay, so option 1 is the best choice. Okay, the two inherent limitations of ping pong as a metaphor for communication are, okay, so ping pong as a metaphor for communication is in this paragraph. Yes, so what does it tell us? Unlike bowling, okay, unlike bowling, that's of course a leading off from the first paragraph. Unlike bowling, ping pong is not a solo game. Okay, so it's not a solo game. This fact alone makes it a better analogy for interpersonal communication. Okay, one party puts the conversational ball in play and the other gets into position to receive. Okay, it takes more concentration and skill to receive than to serve. Okay, to receive than to serve, because while the speaker, that is the server, knows where the message is going, the listener doesn't. Right? So the person who's serving, the person who's sending the message knows where it is going. The receiver doesn't. Right? Like a verbal or non-verbal message, the ball may appear straightforward, yet have a deceptive spin. Okay, so look at that. Like a verbal or non-verbal message, it may appear straightforward, yet, okay, that's a contradiction, have a deceptive spin. It may go somewhere that the other person is not expecting it to. Ping pong is a back and forth game. Players switch roles continuously. One moment, the person holding the paddle is an initiator. The second, the same player is the next second, the same player is a responder, gauging the effectiveness of his or her shot by the way the ball comes back. The repeated adjustment essential for good play closely parallels the feedback process described in a number of interpersonal communication theories. So this is the information that the author gives us about ping pong as a metaphor for communication. Now, what are the limitations of ping pong as a metaphor? The first one says it is governed by conventions. Conventions are traditional rules and regulations with possibility for appeal, right? There is no such mention or indication in the passage. Yes, possibility for appeal is not there. That is, you appeal to a referee or a judge, right? That is not mentioned. The operating model is win-lose because only one individual or team can win. The receiver can always predict the spin. No, the passage very clearly says over here, right? It says very clearly over here that it can have a deceptive spin. Yes, so option 2 is out. The number of players is limited as very few can be meaningfully engaged at a time. The rules of the game are fixed by the regulators. Yes, so this can definitely be a limitation or something that sort of does not let it be a complete metaphor for communication. Okay, it demands more skills of the receiver than of the speaker. It is as passive. It doesn't say anywhere that it is passive, right? Real life communication is like dumb charades. Where did dumb charades come from? This is completely irrelevant, right? The question is about ping pong. Yes. So option 3, which says the number of players is limited, right? Ping pong it is. So only 2 people or maybe 4 people at the most right, can play at a time. The rules of the game are fixed by the regulator. So whoever is deciding how the game is going, that is the person who decides. So in that case, can it be a metaphor for communication? No, because with communication, the people who are sending and receiving the message are the ones that are regulating in the message, right? So that becomes a limitation of ping pong as a metaphor for communication. All right. Action, interaction, and transaction is closest to. Okay. So these three things, what do they convey, right? And which option can we get that are similar to action, interaction, and transaction, right? All of which take place in communication. Yes. So what is action? Action is one way. Okay. Interaction is two-way. And what is transaction? Transaction is two-way again, but with an addition to it. What is it? There is cooperation from both sides. Yes. So we're looking for something that is similar to that. That would be option 1, which says advertising, which is action. It's one way. Buyer negotiating with the seller is an interaction. Both people are speaking. Bidding for a player in the Indian Premier League, right? So here there is a transaction, meaning it's a two-way interaction, and there is cooperation from both sides. Yes. So that would be the best choice from this lot. All right. We have here another passage. What does this passage say? This passage talks about the markets, yes, and specifically the market-based economic theories and why the market-based economic theories fail when it comes to Asian economies. Yes, that's what is discussed in the second paragraph. All right. So the first question says, dash, whether government can improve matters. Here, matters indicates. Okay. Where do you find the answer to this question? You find it towards the end of the first paragraph. All right. So it says here, yeah. And information is always imperfect and markets are always incomplete. Nor do markets by themselves necessarily lead to economic efficiency when the task of a country is to absorb new technology to close the knowledge gap, a central feature of development. Today, most academic economists agree that markets by themselves do not lead to efficiency. The question is whether the government can improve matters. Okay, so what do government can improve matters? What matters are we talking about? We're talking about the economic efficiency, effectiveness. Yes, so that would be option 1. Okay, because that is what is discussed there. Question 18 says, which of the following options cannot be inferred from the above passage? Okay, so we can get 4 statements. One of them we cannot get. I'll work backwards on this. The answer to this is option 5. This is one that cannot be inferred from this passage, right? State intervention and imperfect information can never, right? For one, it has the word never, right? And imperfect information can never go hand in hand, right? Now, state intervention, yes, is whether the government can improve matters, right? It does talk about that towards the end of the first paragraph. But does it talk about information there? No, it talks about economic efficiency. Yes, that's why option 5 is the one that cannot be inferred from this passage. Yes, where do we get the other statements from? The first one says free flow of short-term capital might fail to ensure economic growth. Okay, where do you get this particular option from? You get it from the end of the first paragraph. It says, by the same token, the economic theory is based on imperfect information and the incomplete risk management that predicted that the free flow of short-term capital, a key feature of market fundamentalist policies, would produce not growth but instability, have also been borne out. Okay, so would that the free flow of short-term capital would produce not growth but instability, right? Now the expectation is that the free flow of capital would produce growth. Yes, but he says the economic theories that say that free flow of short-term capital actually produces instability and not growth have been borne out. Borne out means they have been proven, right? They have been exemplified, they have been illustrated. Yes, so this we get from the last part of the second paragraph. Okay, option 2, insurance market is a proof that markets by themselves do not lead to efficiency. We get this from the first paragraph. Yes, it says here, at the beginning of the passage. Advances in economic theory in the 1970s and 80s illuminated the limits of markets. They showed that unfettered markets do not lead to economic efficiency whenever information is imperfect or markets are missing. For instance, right? So it is given in the brackets here, an example of insurance markets. Okay, good insurance markets to cover the key risks confronting individuals, and information is always imperfect and markets are always incomplete. Yes, so from here we understand that insurance market, one example that is given, is proof that markets by themselves do not lead to efficiency. It is difficult to interpret the success of economic policies of Asian countries, right? Says the third option. This we get from the second paragraph, okay, which says, unfortunately, okay, you read from here, unfortunately, because each country differs in its history and circumstances and in the myriad of details. Myriad is many details, yes? So each country differs. And details do matter. It is often difficult to get a clear interpretation. What is clear, however, is that there have been marked differences in performance, that the most successful countries have been those in Asia, and that in most of the Asian countries, government played a very active role. As we look more carefully at the effects of particular policies, these conclusions are reinforced. There is a remarkable congruence between what economic theory says government should do and what the East Asian governments actually did. Okay, so he says it is very difficult to interpret. That essentially is what statement 3 boils down to, right? That it is difficult to interpret the success, right? What is thought of, what is expected is not what actually happens in the East Asian economies. Yes, and technology can impede market efficiency. You get from the last part of the first paragraph, which says, nor do markets by themselves necessarily lead to economic efficiency when the task of a country is to absorb new technology, right? To close a knowledge gap, a central feature of this, etc., etc., right? So technology is something that can again impede. Impede is get in the way of market efficiency. Yes. So these four statements can be inferred. Statement 5 is nowhere indicated. All right. Let's take a look at this question. Now, this asks you to capture the essence of the two paragraphs in the above passage. Now, by the time you answer the previous question, you've more or less understood this passage pretty well, right? So this is a passage, I think, that can be attempted quite easily, right? So it might look a little difficult in the beginning, but read it. Try and approach the passage better, understand the passage better with the help of the questions. Okay, so by the time you finish the previous two questions, you get to this. What is the essence of the two paragraphs? It is actually option 3, which says paragraph 1 explains why markets fail. That is essentially what the first paragraph is doing, right? So it says it illuminated the limits of markets, showed that unfettered markets, unfettered is uncontrolled, right? Unregulated markets do not lead to economic efficiency. Okay, unfettered is mentioned here, do not lead to economic efficiency, right? Whenever information is imperfect, etc., etc. Okay, so it says today most academic economists agree that markets by themselves do not lead to efficiency. The question is whether government can improve matters. So the first paragraph explains why markets fail, and the second one spells out, okay? Second one spells out why market-based economic theories fail to explain the success of Asian economics, right? So the second paragraph essentially talks about that. While it is difficult, okay, for economics to perform experiments to test their theories as a chemist or physicist might, the world provides a vast array of natural experiments as dozens of countries try different strategies, right? And then it goes on to say, unfortunately, because each country differs. Yes, so it talks about how in Asia it is successful, right? But market-based economic theories are not able to explain that. Yes, so option 3 is the best choice. Okay. This passage is a little more complex. It is slightly abstract. So this one you should read, take a look at the questions, and then take a call. All right. This passage talks about existence and consciousness, two concepts, right? It talks about the relationship between the two, right? It starts by quoting Ayn Rand, a famous novelist, right, who deals with philosophies such as individualism and collectivism. Okay, so the base of objectivism, according to Ayn Rand, is explicit. Existence exists, and the act of grasping that statement implies two corollary axioms. Axioms are principles that something exists which one perceives, okay, and that one exists processing consciousness, consciousness being the faculty of perceiving that which exists. All right, so read through it. As I said, read through the passage, take a look at the questions and see if you're able to answer it, answer the questions. So when you look at it from the perspective of the options, you might find such passages easier. What does the first question say? Which of the following is definitely correct according to the passage? Yes. So it says only what can be perceived exists. Yes. That's not what the first paragraph is saying. It doesn't say that only what can be perceived. First of all, it has the word only. Yes. Which is nowhere mentioned or indicated in the passage. Yes. So option 1 can be eliminated. Option 2 says what exists is perceived. Okay, so this again is a trap option because it uses the words from the passage, but it twists the words from the passage. What the passage says is that something exists which one perceives, and that one exists processing consciousness. What is consciousness? The faculty or the capacity of seeing, perceiving that which exists, right? So it is not that what exists is perceived. It's not that it exists because it is perceived, right? That's why option 2 doesn't work. All that exists does not have consciousness. Yes, again, it has the dangerous word all. All that exists does not have consciousness. No. Again, consciousness is defined as the capacity to see what exists, right? Therefore, we do not know whether all that exists does or does not have consciousness. Consciousness makes perception of being possible, which is what the last sentence of the first paragraph is saying. Yes, so that's why that's your answer. Something to be known and someone to know are the conditions sine qua non for existence. Right? This is beyond the scope of this passage. Therefore, we eliminate this also. 21. Which of the following is the essence of the law of causality? The law of causality is mentioned in the second paragraph, right? This is where it is mentioned. What does it say? The law of causality states, yes, we are looking for the essence of the law of causality. What does it say? A thing's actions are determined not by chance, okay? Chance here is accident, yes, or luck. It could be any of those. Not by chance, but by its nature, okay? That is by what it is. So it is a thing's actions, right? So what something does depends not on chance, but on what it is, on its nature. Okay, it is important to observe the interrelation of these three axioms. So we'll come to that, but we are looking for the essence of the law of causality, right? Which we get from this sentence. Yes. So which option tells us this? This would be option 5, which says actions of a being are determined by its nature. Yes, so this is a very direct question, right? Very direct answer. So that's why I said, even if you find the passage a little difficult to read, don't give up without trying the questions. Which of the following can be best captured as identity and identification, right? So this is conveyed or implied in the last sentence. The function of consciousness is not to create reality, but to apprehend it, okay? The function of consciousness is not to create reality, but to apprehend it. Apprehend it is understand. Existence is identity. Consciousness is identification. Okay, so existence is identity. It is having a characteristic, having a nature. Yes, consciousness is identification, understanding it or seeing it. Yes, perceiving it. Remember, right? So, which one can be best captured as identity and identification? College is identity, perception of cultural events. Cultural events is too specific and it is just one thing which is part of college and it's not even the most important thing in college. Yes. Therefore, option 1 can be eliminated. Option 2 says Twitter as identity, Perception of Twitter as identification. So this is the answer, because Twitter is the thing. Yes, so it is a thing, it has a nature, it has a characteristic. Perception of Twitter, how one perceives it, that is identification. Government as identity, perception of taxation. Again, if it had been perception of the government, then yes, maybe we could have considered this, right? So again, it is too specific. Marriage as identity, perception of children, same thing. It should have been perception of marriage. That would have been identification. MBA as identity, perception of campus placement. Again, one aspect, right? So Twitter, so the same thing, the way that thing is seen, that is known as identification. So one is a thing, that is the identity. The way that thing is seen is identification. 23 says the author would interpret Francis Bacon's nature to be commanded must be obeyed as. Okay, so this is mentioned in the last 2-3 sentences. Existence is the first axiom, first rule or principle. The universe exists independent of consciousness, right? So regardless of whether it is perceived or not, the universe exists. Man is able to adapt his background to his own requirements, but nature, so man is able to adapt his background to his requirements, but nature, to be commanded, must be obeyed, said Francis Bacon. There is no mental process that can change the laws of nature or erase facts. Okay, the function of consciousness is not to create reality, but to apprehend it. Apprehend it is perceive or understand it. Okay, so what would this statement mean? How would the author interpret it? This would be option 5. Yes. So let's work backwards from here. Before channeling nature, channeling is controlling it, right? Sending it along one path. So before channeling nature, one must first comply with it. Before one tries to control nature, yes, one must first comply with it, right? So in order to be able to command nature, we need to first obey it, right? We need to first understand it. We first need to see it, perceive it, then understand it, and then we can try controlling it, right? So that's why option 5 is the best choice. We have here the last passage of this paper, right? This passage is actually, I would say, this makes for rather complex reading, and the questions are also quite abstract. Okay, so I would say the previous passage is something that you can, you can attempt with the help of the questions. So you can read the questions, go back to the relevant parts of the passage, because it definitely leads you to specific parts of the passage. This passage and the questions are slightly more abstract. So are the options. Okay, this talks about the complete truth and the approximation to the complete truth. That's what this passage is about. Okay, so the author starts by saying each piece or part of the whole of nature is always merely, right? So please note here the author is saying it's always merely an approximation to the complete truth or the complete truth so far as we know it, right? So it's either something that approaches the complete truth or is the complete truth so far as we know it. Okay, in fact, everything we know is only some kind of approximation. So everything we know is only. Okay, so please note the difference in this passage. It uses the word only, it uses the word always, so it is pretty definitive. Yes, because we know that we do not know. Okay, because we know that we do not know all the laws as yet, right? And this essentially is from where we get the answer to the first question of this passage. Which of the following options is definitely not an approximation to the complete truth? Definitely not an approximation to the complete truth, something that approaches the complete truth, right? So which one is not? I know that I know, right? Yes, that is as far as we know it, I know that I know. Okay, I know that I do not know. Again, something that is an approximation to the complete truth. So far as we know, or so far as I know that I do not know. I know what I know, so far as we know it, right? So it is merely an approximation to the complete truth or the complete truth as far as we know it. Yes, everything we know is only some kind of approximation. So I know what I know. Yes, at least as far as I think I know it. I know what I do not know. Okay, now this is one that doesn't fit in with this particular idea. Okay, I know what I do not know. How can I know what I do not know? Right? It is there is a limit, there is a certain limitation to what we know. Yes. So how do I know what I do not know? There are so many things that I do not know, right? That's why this is one that doesn't approximate or doesn't come close to the complete truth. Option 5, I know that others do not know. Yes, so far as I know, we do not know all the laws as yet. The same thing applies to others also, right? So these work, but I know what I do not know. Okay, I know that others do not know. Mind you, please note the difference. Okay, it says I know what. This is what I do not know. Okay, it is not I know that I do not know. If it had been I know that I do not know, then this would also, and that is there. Yes, that is statement 2, right? That is an approximation to the complete truth. But how can I know what I do not know? I know what I know, but how can I know? There are so many things. It's infinite, it's vast, right? What I do not know. Yes, so that is not an approximation to the complete truth. There are two statements here. The mass of an object never seems to change. Okay, so this is in the second paragraph where the author gives an example, right? So this is where it is. A spinning top has the same weight as a still one. So a law was invented, mass is constant, independent of speed. Okay, that law is now found to be incorrect. Okay, so this rule that was originally made, the law that was originally made is now found to be incorrect. Mass is found to increase with velocity, but appreciable increase requires velocities near that of light. A true law is, okay, a true law is if an object moves with a speed of less than 100 miles a second, the mass is constant to within 1 part in a billion. In some such approximate form, this is a correct law. So in practice, one might think that the new law makes no significant difference. Okay, well, yes and no. For ordinary speeds, we can certainly forget it and use a simple constant mass law as a good approximation. But for high speeds, we are wrong, and the higher the speed, the wrong we are. Finally, and most interestingly, philosophically, we are completely wrong with the approximate law. Our entire picture of the world has to be altered, even though mass changes only by a little bit. This is a very peculiar thing about the philosophy or the ideas behind the law. Even a small effect requires profound changes to our ideas. Okay, so this is the example, that the statements that the question refers to. Which of the following options cannot be concluded from the above passage based on the two statements? Yes. So the first one says both statements 1 and 2 are approximation to the complete truth. Yes, because they are perceived, right? They are approximation because they are saying that we know to a certain extent. Yes, but there are also things that we don't know. Right. So 1 and 2, so there have been corrections to the law. Yes. So both 1 and 2 are approximation to the complete truth. Both 1 and 2 are the complete truth so far as we know. Yes. Again, it goes along with the idea of the approximation to the truth. Yes, approximation to the truth. And how is complete truth mentioned? It is mentioned here as something that so far as we know. Okay, that is in the first paragraph. Yes, then statement 1 is an approximation to the complete truth, but statement 2 is complete truth. Yes, again, so far as we know, right? It can change. Yes, so far as we know, mass is found to increase with velocity. That can change. Yes, and the first one, that the mass of an object never seems to change, is an approximation because it was corrected already. Right, so this is also correct. Option 4, yes, statement 1 reveals that American experimental physicists who imagine, deduce and guess are philosophically wrong. Right, so what is their philosophy? That they experiment, imagine, deduce and guess. Yes, so this also can be concluded. Yes, so the answer to this will be option 5, which says statement 2 shows that theoretical physicists can pinpoint the shortcomings. Nowhere does it say that theoretical physicists can pinpoint the shortcomings of experimental physicists. We only know the imagining process or the division of labor between theoretical physicists and experimental physicists. We don't know if one can pinpoint the shortcomings or drawbacks of the other. Yes, so that's why option 5 is the best choice. We have here another question based on this passage. Big Bang is a popular theory related to the origin of the universe. Okay, it states that the universe was the outcome of a big bang that released enormous energy. Which of the following is the most probable inference about the Big Bang theory? Okay, so Big Bang theory was first proposed by experimental physicists, right? So if it is proposed, yes, what do the experimental physicists do? This mentioned here, right? Experimental physicists experiment, imagine, deduce, and guess. So if it is the Big Bang theory, could experimental physicists have first experimented the Big Bang theory? No, right? They couldn't have. Therefore, option 1 is out. Option 2 says Big Bang theory was first proposed by theoretical physicists. Yes, so this is an inference that we can draw because they imagine, deduce, and guess at new laws. Yes, so this one is probable. Big Bang theory was first proposed by experimental physicists and then deduced by theoretical physicists. Again, if experimental physicists, the first step they take is to experiment, how would they have experimented on the Big Bang theory? First, the theory would be proposed. Yes, it would be imagined, right? The first step would be that. Therefore, option 3 can be eliminated. Option 4 says philosophers got the Big Bang theory wrong, right? Well, we don't know. Yes, because we don't know whether it is right or wrong. And Big Bang theory is not an approximation of the complete truth. This actually would contradict the passage because it is a theory, right? And an approximation of the complete truth is, well, it says that everything we know is only some kind of approximation because we do not know. We know that we do not know all the laws as yet. Yes, that is the approximation, isn't it? So where the Big Bang, it's a theory. So it would be an approximation of the complete truth because it is something that is imagined. It is proposed because they first imagine it, they deduce, then they guess, yes, at making it into a law, right? So that's the idea. So option 5 also can be eliminated. Option 2 is the most probable inference.